Welcome to Tales of Hope, where every paw print counts. Animal tie in the house, spreading love, hear the sounds. Every week animal stories, rights and welfare in the mix. Step up, take action, we're giving animals a fix. Tales of Hope, raise your voice, make some noise. Change the game for every animal, girl and boy. One world, one fight, let's turn the page. A future for the voiceless, bring hope to center stage.
A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our listeners around the globe. Welcome to the show Tales of Hope podcast. Today we have a wonderful guest with us, Dr. Shefali Batra, who is a psychiatrist, a cognitive therapist as well, and she's an author of a book even. And above all, she is an avid animal lover. Shefali, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Now, I'm going to dive straight into the question. What sparked your journey of blending psychiatry with animal welfare?
Well, honestly, they're two different concepts. Animal welfare isn't a profession, psychiatry is. But it's an interesting question because being a mental health professional, dealing with people's emotions, and the key word here is empathy, right? So if A requires C and B requires C, then there must be similar between A and B, right? There must be some similarity. So when we look at empathy, just by virtue of understanding other people, understanding people's emotions, I guess it just spilled over to animals. I mean, I didn't know I was as much of an animal lover growing up. I didn't grow up with pets, didn't grow up with families who love pets, but grew up with compassion. And soon there were friends, there were some, close people associated with me who were animal lovers. And it all started out with a friend who was moving abroad and needed a nice, loving home for her pet. And so she gave it to me, and I was just a little skeptical about being nice. It was a bird, and I was just wondering, will I be a good mom to the bird? And I think I took it to an all new level, and that really sparked off. It kind of unleashed what was already there. So that's when I recognized that it could be any animal, but that feeling that I want to be there for them, for protecting them, came in. So that's how I think empathy played its bit. And mental health, of course, is a profession, but taking it on to animals and now working so much in the space with animals. So I think that's where it just fit. And I'm glad that it did.
Well, you really mentioned empathy has been the core word, but I think we humans are losing it a bit.
We are indeed.
We're not attuned to it as much. Now, how do you explain in simple words why kindness to animals is good for human mental health too?
So if you look at research, it repeatedly affirms. We'll get into the good and the bad side, of course, the bright and the dark side of the human mind, because there are some people who do enjoy being cruel to others. Clearly that is why they do it, because it gets reinforced. But inherently, when we're nice, when we bring a smile to someone else's face, it makes us happy. You see, we can't make someone else smile without smiling ourselves. Right? I mean, so many times we ask someone to click a photograph, and I usually like it when the photographer smiles. So then I know I have to smile too, right? It's a reciprocal phenomenon. So when we're kind to people and we see that we made someone feel good, we tend to feel good. This is a normal human brain, the way we were born, the way we were created and meant to be. But along the way, if things change, yes, then we might enjoy inflicting pain. But inherently, because we are wired we want to be happy. All of us want to be happy. No one wants to be sad. So when we make someone else happy, that becomes our recipe for joy. And if we take that very seriously, then we will consistently keep toiling to make people happy or to make animals happy. So animals are more receptive to that love. So if you sometimes do something nice for a human, then they begin to wonder, why are they doing this nice? Is it a manipulation? Do they want something from me? but the animals will very cleanly and clearly accept your love. So, going by that, being nice to an animal makes us feel nice about ourselves. That is why animals are particularly good for mental health. And going more like a psychiatrist now, talking about the benefits that, on a mental health perspective, people who suffer from anxiety, depression, concentration deficits, all of these issues that we're seeing rising a lot in mental health, when you put in accountability for someone, usually a mentally disturbed person wouldn't even be able to take care of themselves. But when we even trust in a small thing like a fish, a tiny little goldfish, I used to do that a lot with children, because with children, you can't essentially offer them a dog because the child is not going to walk the dog, or the child will not clean the litter box for a cat. But a little fish, just to put that little food, to give that sense of responsibility, that 2 times a day you have to put in 20 pellets, but that adds accountability to your routine. So things like that, adding that responsibility. Then of course, when it comes to cat and dog, we're walking the dog, we're talking about our cat, so that also enhances the social connectiveness. So in this way, caring for somebody, showing empathy, showing that compassion makes one a better person, and then the added accountability and sociability is like a bonus. So this is why having an animal, having a pet, or even you could have street. I know so many animal lovers, animal feeders, rescuers. They say, hey, I have 37 cats. I said, hey, where are the 37 cats? No, they're on the street, but they're my cats, because I take care of their food, I take care of their health, I take care of vaccination, I take care of any injury. Once someone said at 9 in the evening, 9 in the night, I'm running to the police station because my cat is missing. So things like that becomes your pet, literally. So that's where the whole sense of loving animals can be really, really good for human beings.
Well, you touched a lot of points. And the most important I felt was, which from my personal experience I can vouch for, it has helped me evolve as a human, not only me, but even my wife. When I returned from Singapore, I used to take care of 17 cats in Mumbai. I had all of them, taking care of them. And then when me and my mom, we shifted to Pune, at that time I used to do a lot of feeding for pigeons and things like that. And I think it was in 2021 when we got our first baby. And I keep telling my mother even, it is because of him we started evolving more in terms of, there is so much that we have learned from him, me and my wife. We keep talking about it. And then we have another 2 rescues. One is a Indie and the other 2 are labs. We didn't know when we started out to get the first one. It all happened. But fortunately, we never bought anything from the breeders.
Yeah.
This was from one family to another. My wife's ex-colleague, she had one that delivered. So that was the first one, Karma. And then we had the second one who was rescued, Meera. And then now we have Cookie. That's from my mother's compound. She is the one I've been taking care right since the day she was born. But you rightly mentioned one thing. These animals, if you show compassion towards them, it actually reciprocates. They reciprocate so unconditionally that you won't believe it. When because I shift between my mother's house and my wife's house, if you want to call it like that, the days I'm not there and I go back, which is like about 2-3 days time every week. When I go back, at least for the next 30 to 40 minutes, it's like they are all over me, the kind of excitement you see. I think even today, when you look at it as humans, if you have a guest or somebody even you love comes to your place, you don't show so much of affection and happiness.
Correct, because this is unfiltered. You see, the filters are too much, the inhibitory center of our brain. We can't show too much love, because then that also seems odd and it raises Antine, that why am I getting extra love today? So unfortunately, or well, yeah, it is unfortunate that human beings, we have become selfish. We've become manipulative in that sense that we like doing things to gain something. So a slight ulterior selfish motive tends to come in. But that is something, you give an animal just a little bit of food, a place to sleep, which usually is your lap, which they like, and that's it. Just pet a street dog and he'll wag his tail for you. Human beings don't do that. Of course, we don't have tails, but the point I'm trying to make is we don't receive and give love that openly and freely and that unrestricted. That is where animals differ. And call it, yes, I like it too when one cat sleeps on my head and the other one sleeps on my stomach. And the day they don't, I'm up looking around that what did I do wrong that they're not giving me that love today. But I know they're somewhere in my room, and that's enough. But we have that. I mean, it could be selflessly selfish also. I mean, I want their love only because it is just so warm and fuzzy and cuddly, but not at the cost of them not wanting to be around me. But that is where animals can be absolutely angelic. There is no tinge of selfishness. There's not a bit of awkwardness with them. It's absolutely unfiltered. I think that's what makes that kind of love superior to human love.
Absolutely. Now, moving forward, from a psychiatrist view, what drives some people to commit or tolerate animal cruelty?
Like I mentioned earlier, cruelty is not something we're inherently born with. Yes, we do have an aggression gene, and the amount of studies that are going in simply because we're seeing the rise in terror, the rise in crime. So, were we born like this? It's a tough one. Was I born to be a psychiatrist? I made the choice at some point that this is what I want to be. But when it comes to cruelty, when it comes to tolerating, propagating, supporting cruelty, there have to have been some life experiences at some point in our earlier days which motivate one to be like this, which make it a conditioned response that this is the only way I know how to be. So even if it's a really cute cat, or we have these mirror neurons in our brain which mirror the feeling of another. That is why if you watch a gory scene in a movie, you just cringe because it's really uncomfortable. You feel it's happening to you. And when you're smiling at a cat or a dog, well, they don't essentially smile at you, but we as humans smile because it's our response to smile when we're happy or smile when we love someone. Oh, we have someone joining us.
Oh, please. She's more than welcome.
Yeah, the little baby boy. But yeah, so he's just dipping his head into my mug of water. So there goes my water. He's drinking my water. Sorry about that. So we were born to love. We were born to give love. We were born to enjoy even receiving love. So this is where the sort of lovers are pretty sorted in that it's very easy to explain our brain because we like feeling happy. Now, to come to a point where do some of us humans enjoy inflicting pain? That could come from many, many different scenarios that could have occurred early on to develop our brain's wiring in that dimension. So, I would say, according to one theory, when we're born, our brain is, it's called tabula rasa, which is a blank slate. So we're blank. You can write whatever you choose to on it. Okay, so we were born blank, and whatever was written on our space in our mind became our brain's wiring. But who wrote what at what point in time, and how much stuck onto that slate, and how much was removed? That becomes the question. So, if we've endured cruelty in childhood, and when I say cruelty, I even mean any form of even a mild or slight abuse, or even a parent talking in a loud volume, or maybe an occasional physical abuse too. So, or neglect that, maybe some child was not given food. So, such children may have had to fight really hard for survival. After all, everything we do is actually a survival instinct, right? Even envy, jealousy, in the work that we do. If I lose a job, why did I lose a job? Why did that guy progress? So it's all essentially survival. When something threatens our survival, we stand up and fight. It's the fight, fright, flight response of stress, which is natural. That response is fixed in everyone. It's even fixed in animals, right? But if we have had to fight for that survival, if we had to fight really hard to even exist and to, let's say, for our rights or for things that we deserve, we start believing that this is a way of life. It gets imprinted, it becomes normal, right? A child would wonder, why did my parent not treat me well? I'm just giving an example. I'm not saying this is the case in everyone. But if a child would wonder, why did my parent not treat me well? No one's willing to think that I'm wrong, so they didn't treat me right. The typical response is, what a parent does is right. What an adult does to me is right. So being a little bit cruel or evil is right. And once that is imprinted, then cruelty becomes a part gradually of your DNA. We call it almost a generational trauma or a generational response that I will be mean to others. So you would notice that human beings who are not so kind to animals are not very kind to human beings either. It has to spill over to, that's in the neighborhood, it's not even my cat. Did you hear that?
No, I couldn't.
It was a loud, it was a loud screech of a cat. Sorry, more receptive to animals. So the fact that this is what we've endured, this is what we've known, this is what we've seen. Maybe in a violent video game, somebody is shooting animals. So then it just becomes normal that in reality, also we tend to hurt animals. So that is why what you're born with could be a slight genetic influence, but what you endure and what you see and what you associate with becomes part of you. And that gets imprinted on your mind to the point that it almost is imprinted on your DNA. And it could change your gene sequencing to make you that person. This is how cruelty just becomes normal to some people because the brain circuits also change. It just becomes who you are.
That's a very interesting fact you've mentioned, for people to understand. Now, which myth about animals or about those who love them do you most want to bust?
The myth about those who don't love animals. Sorry, you meant that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you said about those who love them. You want?
I mean, which myth about animals or about those who love them, because let's be honest.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it.
Do you most want to bust?
I think what most animal neutrals, or what we say non-lovers, or we could extend it to haters, believe that animals are dangerous. It's funny. I like the way you laughed because I think humans are more dangerous.
Absolutely.
I read a quote the other day. The humans built the atomic bomb. But till date, past, present, or in the future, you will never have a mouse build a mousetrap.
Exactly.
We don't build to endanger our own species. If I was an animal, I could say that. But no, humans, we build to kill our own selves. We spend so much time, effort, and money on such research on nuclear bombs, biological warfare. We do all of this. Animals don't do that. All animals want is a little bit of food and a little bit of love. Animals do have emotions. So this is just something very unique to our species, that we care about ourselves so much, to the point everybody cares about themselves, but we care about ourselves so much to the extent that we will use nature to our advantage. We think we're entitled. We think we have that right. That is what makes humans distinct from others. We boast of having a conscience and cognitive evolution. And it is believed that, it is said that humans have a soul. Here comes the second one.
Oh, she's cute.
Both are boys.
What is she wearing around her neck?
He is wearing a collar. It's a surgical collar, but He's allergic to his hair, so when he licks his own hair, he vomits.
Okay.
So he's always had this accessory around. He has multiple colors and designs, so he's always wearing these.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming back to your question about it actually raises the point of anthropocentrism, that we're so focused on humanity such that we think that we can use all of nature to our advantage. Animals, nature, trees, ponds, lakes, rivers, oceans, everything is meant to serve us, has become our belief. And that is why we are seeing that cruelty to animals is allowed. Look at animal hunting. People want to check how their aim is, so they will shoot an animal and they'll feel like, oh my god, I just got it. I shot that running deer. Imagine how good I am. So that's where objectification happens, that these are not living beings according to us. These cannot feel, so we are allowed to hurt them. We are allowed to be cruel. That is what has gotten more and more ingrained into the minds of human beings. And that could also create a rift where a lot of animal lovers are accused of being human haters. It's happened so often. I mean, when I was posting on Instagram about animal love and correcting misconceptions about rabies, and it just expressed a pro animal sentiment, I started getting a lot of trolling comments like, you animal lover, you fanatic animal lover and human hater. And I was just wondering, I mean, I'm a psychiatrist. I do that for a living, 25 years of seeing thousands of people. No one's called me a human hater, but it had to be an animal hater who called me a human hater. It didn't make any logical sense, but this is where that riff is coming in.
Coming to this point, I think just 2 days back, I was interviewing one of the lawyers who works with the animal rights.
Mm-hmm.
And, the difference that you were talking about, she said, in Argentina, people don't kill horses to eat. Okay?
Don't kill horses to eat.
Yeah. But on the other hand, it is okay. They take it as okay to, export them to meat-eating countries where the horses can be killed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we humans, at the end of the day, when it comes, what, like you rightly said, we think everything is here to serve us and our benefits and the way we want it to be treated or the way we want it to be. It's more of supremacy.
Mm.
And, to add this, just this morning, I have been having these issues with the society where my mother stays. Almost every time we have these issues. And this morning, even one of the guys just picked up the stick and wanted to beat these six kids. It is, sometimes it's so disheartening, because if you are going to reciprocate with a stick and going to beat them, they're naturally going to bark.
Obviously.
They're going to come and try and attack you. That's their defense mechanism. If we were to do it, it's the mirror reflection. If I wanted to take a stick and beat you, you would pick up another stick. So that's their defense mechanism. They're just trying to defend.
Correct. We're teaching. See, that's why aggression breeds aggression.
Absolutely.
You won't have an animal who will inherently attack you. But if you attack him and then he attacks you and then you say, oh, he's aggressive, I think that is pretty unfair, because that goes true even for human beings, right? A kid comes and tells his mother that the other boy beat me. And if the mother is going to fail to ask him, what did you do first? Then I think it's quite unfair. So humans have become so selfish in that regard. I'm sure, being an animal lover, you've seen sufficient number of videos of a dog quietly sitting in a corner, 3 dogs sitting in a corner, and a cute little baby girl comes with a stick and starts beating them. And then the dog gets up and bites the girl. And then the parents say that the dog is aggressive. Now, this isn't a fight in a court of law, because our country doesn't encourage it and does not allow us to see on that CCTV camera who committed the crime first.
Absolutely.
Because humans are superior, they are just always right, becomes the norm. And I'm not very pro that, right. That is what anthropocentrism is, that we are making human beings the center of the universe. But no, I think we need to have the humility to recognize that we are not the center, we're part of an ecosystem. You can't just eradicate. I mean, where you get rid of dogs, monkeys come in. Are you okay with monkeys? Nobody has those many, pet monkeys as we have pet dogs, because the species, as a species, the dogs and the cats were more wired and tuned to be pets. We don't really keep crocodiles as pets because
Exactly.
it doesn't sound right. Some people do have snakes, but you don't sleep in bed with that snake. I mean, you sleep in bed with your cat and your dog. So they were meant to be different. That is why the love for these two particular varieties of animals has seen a greater magnitude of course in the universe. So we need to recognize that.
Absolutely. And, just to add a last thing to this, I don't need to see videos because
You
I see
experience it, you see it.
I see it every day. I fight it every day. So I know,
I know.
these kids coming. Just, I mean, I remember when these kids were so small. These two of them are still here, and when they were still like about 2 or 3 months, they would be sleeping, and all these kids would come. I mean, they're sleeping in the afternoon. Why do you want to kick it?
Right.
They would come and kick it, and I used to, Anyways, I am not. I haven't given up as yet fighting for them. I still.
I know. It's just it seems bizarre that if human beings are kind creatures, why have these human beings either endured or been taught to be unkind? If a little child inherently wants to go and pet a little dog on the street, the mother says, "Hey, don't go. He's going to bite you. Once he bites you, you'll get rabies. When you have to get rabies, you're going to get 100 big fat injections. Firstly, they're not 100, they're only 4. But this is how children are taught how to be scared. They are taught that dogs and cats and animals on the street are their enemies. And so you should steer clear of them. So this learning, I mean, imagine if we could take this learning on the other side. That this guy also has feelings. He feels hungry, and why don't you give a bit of your food to the dog? Then we're teaching the children kindness, empathy, care, compassion, sharing. But no, unfortunately, we've forgotten that.
Absolutely, we've forgotten all those, the good aspects of being human.
The humane traits which make us human are going. Can you imagine when a human being behaves aggressively, they call us animals? I mean, I'm wondering in the dog's vocabulary, what would they be calling humans right now?
Absolutely.
Being human has become a bad word in that sense, because I don't think anybody is as cruel as humans can be.
I wouldn't disagree with you on that. I mean, I know a lot of people would have their biases against it, but
yeah, a lot of people even listening to this might think that what is this anti-human talk? No, this is not anti-human talk. This is anti-compassion, the lack of compassion talk. Sorry, wherein not having compassion is just not. It's not right.
It's not it's not acceptable. Let's be very blunt about it. It's not acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable to the human race.
It should not. Yes,
absolutely.
It's not all about us.
Exactly.
You cut down the forests, and then the next time you have floods, and then you're blaming it on God. I mean, you need to recognize what did you do to let that happen. Given the floods happening in Punjab and the whole Himachal, the whole deforestation issue, this is all the selfishness of humanity.
Absolutely. Now, why do some people dislike or fear animals? And how can empathy be grown there? It's almost like what we were discussing. But how can
exactly what we just said, that you are not born not liking animals, but you could evolve into not liking them based on the experiences that you had, on what was taught to you, the kind of video games you played, or the kind of company you kept. People have animals in their home who they call them pets, but they still abuse them. So if a child has gone to a friend's place who has a dog and sees that guy hitting his dog, that's when the child learns that even if it is your own pet, I mean, it's the same way like some parents raise their hand on their children. But this is my son, so I can beat him. So this is my dog, so I can beat him or I can neglect him. There are sufficient number of pet owners too who could be not so compassionate to animals. Maybe they are venting their aggression on an animal within the household. So many such possibilities. This is what normalizes cruelty. This is what makes cruelty acceptable. In a place like Istanbul, wherein if a cat is stuck on an elevator, there would be 7 people coming to rescue that cat, to put him back on the. There was a cat who spent hours walking up an escalator coming down. And finally, a bunch of people saw that and then they came and moved the cat. But how many people in India would do that? In India, we take cats and dogs and we push them down the gutter and we cover it up and we clap. That is utter and sheer sadism, because these people have been evolved. They've been wired to think like that. So the brain wiring has changed. That is where it is becoming more and more abnormal. I mean, I'm calling it abnormal because in my mind it is not the norm. But likewise, animal haters might find me abnormal. To have my cat sitting right here in the podcast and I'll tell him, hey, this is your laptop, you can have it. When he's sitting on it, I stop work. But that's not how it works for other people. So I think it's the mindset that becomes like that. And that brain wiring on an empty slate that I called tabula rasa of childhood, on that empty slate, when hate is reinforced, when hate is imprinted, we tend to become that. We tend to embody that hate.
Rightly mentioned, humans, we've normalized killing these so-called infants.
Cruelty has become normal, yes.
Yeah, what? Just to bring out a small example, about a year back in August, when these 3 kids were born at my mother's community, there was another gentleman at that time who actually stood with me at that time in terms of trying to protect them, because there were people in the residential complex where they were like, hey, we just want to put them in a gunny bag and throw them. We've done it already once. And this time, just because I and this other gentleman stood there and, we did what was needed. But the kind of hatred that was directed towards me and my 85-year-old mother, you won't believe it, she was threatened. So,
correct. This is going on more in the entire country now. But what you're describing is precisely what is the viral stuff on social media about the cruelty. So you've endured it too.
I endure it every day. It's like an everyday thing.
Right.
Anyways, moving forward, how does hate speech or trolling around animal issues impact the mental health of the activist and citizens?
What you mentioned, from reality to the digital world, maybe someone like me endures a little more of that, because when I speak about loving animals, you get the classic response: if you like animals so much, take them home, right? But nobody says if you fed hungry kids on the street, take them home. Nobody talks of that, but take the animals home. So I'm not saying that a hungry child on the street will not bark and bite. I understand, and you won't get rabies. But for small and insignificant issues, when animals are blamed and the lover of the animals is also targeted, it becomes, I think it's against the human rights, firstly, to be treated badly for loving another living creature. That tolerance in the human race is absent, and that is seeming abnormal and bizarre. But for an animal activist or an animal lover, so the 3 core traits I believe that an animal activist needs to inculcate: perseverance, adaptability, and inspiration. So through the face of negativity, you will have to persevere. The classic name that comes to all our minds is Mrs. Maneka Gandhi. So there has to be perseverance. You cannot give up on what you believe in. That becomes ingrained in your DNA to be kind. It becomes ingrained in your mind that I have to do what is right. So it's very important to be perseverant despite all odds. It's important to be adaptable, yes, and you'll have to innovate, because if people are, even I was thinking, what should we do now that the hatred I believe the hatred or the expression of it is becoming more free today. We've had some misinterpretations of the Supreme Court ruling, and we've had people thinking that there are supposed to be designated areas. So if you're out of the designated areas, we have a right to beat you. We have a right to rape you because you are feeding an animal in a non-designated area. How much civic sense do those guys have anyway, that they are trying to beat a person? In fact, I think the dogs lick the place clean so well after they eat their food that you're actually making the place cleaner with the animals around. But this kind of, you'll have to be adaptable and innovate. And the third, you will have to be an inspiration to other people. So for the person who is being trolled or the activist who is getting negativity, the perseverance, the adaptability, and the point of being an inspiration to other people so that more people stand up for what is right. Right? It's like, it sounds as bad as if a man is raping a woman, the other man comes and says, hey, I'll rape her too. It's sounding like that when we're having a mob psychology of one hater getting inspired by the other. So here the activists or the animal lovers are all, they all consider themselves to be one family. This is something I have recognized and realized by my recent presence on social media, a little bit of it on correcting misconceptions, busting the myths, talking the truth about animal love, explaining to people how loving animals is good for your own mental well-being, talking about antisocial personality disorder. There have been so many incidents and accounts of people standing up in gardens and having a little anti-animal protest, and there are about 100 people in the background sitting and clapping their hands. People thought that only animal lovers go on protests, but we have animal haters who are meeting in gardens and clapping hands for the person who says, I will kill this dog, I will see to it that how these dogs are not picked up, and so on. So looking at that, we're recognizing that everyone who believes in their own ideology is willing to come together. But the kind of love that animal, we call it animal lover sisters or animal lover friends, the kind of bonds that they have. So just simply even chatting on social media, people are messaging me and they said, oh, we'd love to come and meet your cat. Just said, hey, when I travel, you come and take care of my cats. Oh, I would love to do that. It's just a bond that's getting evolved simply because you love cats. We started out with psychiatry is empathy and animal love is empathy. So I could be a psychiatrist and an animal lover, good combination. Likewise, I love cats and you love cats. So we should be best friends. This is the way those who have humanity and empathy are connecting with each other. That is where the world, I think, would become a better place, because more and more people who have compassion are sharing their capacity for compassion. So that is what all animal activists, animal lovers need to be doing, because the kind of support that we can give each other is going to be enormous. That kind of support you will not find. I put that in the same way when someone tells me that they smoke or drink with their friends. And I say, when you're dying of lung cancer in the hospital, those friends will still be at the katta having their smoke. They will not be sitting by you. That is how, when haters form a community, it's not bonded by love. There is no bond better than love. But when animal lovers form a community, then they all love each other. So that is the extent of kindness and compassion that animal lovers are capable of. So if they maintain their perseverance, their adaptability, innovation, and inspiration potential, I think that would really, really make animal lovers more resilient and tolerant to the negativities going on. And then the social media. So when someone gives me a bad word, I don't give them a bad word back. And I say, I respect your opinion, and it's unfortunate that you think that way. But I just want you to understand that empathy and kindness go a long way in making our world a better place. So that is my response. It has no hate, because they need to recognize that hearts like ours can't have hate. So when an animal hater calls me a fanatic animal lover and a human hater, I feel I don't engage in that conversation because I can't get to their level. They love nobody. I'm not even sure if they love themselves, because someone who can be so unkind does not know the meaning or the definition of love. So some battles we can't win, But I feel we need to catch the newer generation in schools. I went to a Ganpati Pandal and I was just educating the kids about animal love. So I just gave a small little talk on kindness, and of course I had got chocolates and mithai and snacks for them. And they don't always say thank you, but I said, I was even teaching them, you should say please, you should say thank you. It's these teeny tiny little manners that we need to teach our children, so that tomorrow they don't go and beat up 5 street dogs, and then those 5 street dogs will not bite 50 people out of the aggression that they were taught by these aggressive children. So we need to set up that chain of empathy and kindness in the universe, because otherwise I think our world is going to become, it already is, pretty unlivable, given the degree of contempt and hate that we're propagating and generating and reinforcing.
Absolutely. Now, what emotional tools help activists stay hopeful while witnessing cruelty or neglect?
So essentially, like I said, you have to believe and know that it's not supposed to be a battle, but if it is a battle, you need to know that you're fighting for a good cause. So you will get negativity and you will have to be adaptable to it, because you've got to keep your mission intact. And we don't stop loving just because we are hated for loving, but we have to let the love overpower the hate in that regard. The same way as you said, that the stress that people would endure while they are watching such cruelty being inflicted, sometimes even in the law enforcement we're seeing such negativity, right? For any change we need a political will, a social will, and an individual will. So if at a larger level we're becoming a nation which is not so supportive of animals, which I thought we were, unfortunately, and that is changing, because I remember the words of Mahatma Gandhi that a nation's moral compass is dependent on how it treats its animals. But we're not seeing a very good job happening there in our country at the moment. But again, at a higher level, it may be well known that we are a country that loves animals, but at individual levels, if we're having people hurt animals, at the end, it's all at an individual level, right? I mean, human beings do what they wish to do. So I am not loving animals because it was written in the Indian Constitution that I should love every living creature. I'm just loving because the love that emanates from my heart. So I think that individual level needs to be reinforced at an individual, at every human being who is enduring this cruelty experience is feeling hurt. Animal lovers are having more sleepless nights. As a psychiatrist, I have people connecting with me saying that I'm feeling really sad and I don't know how to deal with this. So the degree of stress that human beings are experiencing as a professional, I mean, I get these calls after an AI 171 crash. I get such calls after such mass levels of animal cruelty. So all of these things, we need to train people, yes, that you will face negativity when you're standing up for a cause that if majority of the people around are not supporting. But if you believe what you believe in, you will have to enhance your social support system. You will have to enhance your protection network and build a safety net for yourselves. That's why I said animal loving sisters or animal loving friends have a deeper bond than even real siblings sometimes, because your own sibling may not be as much of an animal lover as you are, but the bond that you share with a fellow animal lover who is willing to stand up with you and for you. So maintain that network. Seek your support. If you're falling low on your energy, you can recharge yourself with the energy from a fellow animal lover who's there to stand up for you, who's there to tell you that you're doing the right thing, who's there to tell you that this is hard and I'm with you. And we're all in the same boat, so don't think that you're alone. So I think when you feel that sense of loneliness and alienation when something untoward is happening, when you realize that you're not alone, you can offload and share the load with other people. So that itself becomes a very important supportive mechanism. And then, of course, if it's getting beyond hand, you should talk to a professional, professional, like mental health professional like me. And especially, I think if I have that empathy and compassion for animals, I think it becomes very easy for me to understand what an animal lover may be enduring at this point. So speak to someone who will empathize with you, and you will then be able to share that burden. And of course, in extreme cases, we do very detailed therapy, and we could also give medication to take care of sleep and anxiety and the negativity and the sadness that people go through. So it's hard. It's hard that the one who is doing good has to endure the trauma, but we have ways to help people
And
deal with it.
I'll tell you, I might just beg to differ a bit with you on a certain thing. And I'm going to be live on it. It's going to be live. But where you mentioned, animal lovers have a community and, you have that sisterhood and brotherhood. I tend to differ on that because with my personal experience, what I've gone through, wouldn't put it on air, but I beg to differ that there are certain people out there who, not only who, but I would say a sizable number, they just want to do it on their own. And when you have a trouble, they don't want to be standing by you.
No, I am not talking for humanity. I'm not talking for 8 billion people in the world. But we saw so much of, for example, again, maybe you shouldn't put this on air, but there are animal, apparently NGOs who may not be very authentic with what they do. Now, I don't want to put that message out there, but there are so many of them, right? There is so much of even human NGOs who claim to be not for profit, but then we know where the profits are going. So there again, it's not a entire system which is wrong. All animal NGOs are not like that, but human beings can be selfish. Humans may not always be selfless.